ariko muri aka kanya twagira ngo twumve ijambo rya nyakubahwa Perezida Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, Perezida w'igihugu cya Uganda, umuyobozi n'umuturanyi twabanye muri uru rugendo kuva imyaka irenga 20 ishize. Excellency,
Your Excellency, President Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Her Excellency the First Lady of Rwanda, Your Excellency the heads of state and government, leaders of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. I greet you and convey to Your Excellencies and the people of Rwanda the greetings of the people of Uganda. Rwanda, along with Burundi, Uganda, parts of northwestern Tanzania, eastern Congo, western Kenya, is part of the Great Lakes area that has, since several millennia, been occupied by the interlacustrine Bantus, by the Nilotics, Nilo-Hamitic, and the Sudanic peoples of this area. The Rwanda people themselves are Bantu, who are part of the interlacustrine Bantus. This area of the Great Lakes is unique because it had quite advanced level of civilization, centralization of state, and state formation. That is in the forms of kingdoms and chiefdoms. It also had advanced agriculture and livestock industry. It had unique industrial practices such as the processing of bananas into alcohol and juice, the milk industry, the cereals of sorghum and millet and their derivatives, the science of converting iron ore, which we call obtare in our language, into iron, was also advanced, totally vertically integrated, as were the workings on other metals such as brass, called emiringa in one of our languages here, copper, ekikomo, etc. Mwa Abanyarwanda murazi inzoga muragizi? In which other part of the world do they make inzoga like yours here? That is a unique industry for this area. There was also the unique technology of making textiles out of the ficus trees, known as mtoma in one of our languages here. In the socio-economic spheres, a feudal system was sitting atop symbiotic societies of agriculturists known as abahinzi, cattle keepers, abarozi, aborozi, aborozi, that is Runyankore proper. Oh, abarozi will be abarogo. Oh, no, these ones who wrote here are the ones who wrote bad things. Aborozi, double O. Craftsmen such as blacksmith, abahesi, woodworkers, ababaizi, pottery workers, ababumbi, textile workers for backcloth, embugu, in Uganda, Ebtoma, known as Abakomaji, leather workers, Abaremi Nyankore, etc., and professionals such as medicine men and the magicians. Magicians were also there, and the musicians were also there. At the top, the system could be parasitic, where the kings and other rulers could expropriate property from the citizens, called Okunyaga in Runyankore. They could also do partial expropriation, called Okunogora. There was also the practice of Obhache in Kinyarwanda. In Nyankore we say it Obhache, a form of serfdom, and later on the Belgians introduced Chiboko. That was introduced by the Belgians. The rulers could also take tribute. In Nyankore, tribute is called Emitoijo. In Kinyarwanda, it was called Amaturo, from the ordinary people. At the base of the society, however, the system was symbiotic, with the different groups specializing in crops, livestock, fishing, Abajubi, seamen, Abarimbi, craftsmen, as already narrated above, medicine men, and then exchanging products. In one of the dialects we call it Okchurka. Somebody told me that in Kinyarwanda they call it Okugurana. Barter trade with one another. It is therefore a historic crime that external forces working with local traitors could turn a symbiotic society into the theater of the most fiendish reactionary crimes, that is genocide. To the credit of one of the kings, Rudahigwa, he had abolished Obhache and Kiboko. That last king who was here had tried to reform the parasitism at the top of the system. He also enforced sharing of economic resources, cows and land, between chiefs and ordinary people, both Hutus and Tutsis. Unfortunately, Rudahigwa was assassinated, and so was Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi. Rudahigwa and Rwagasore were patriots and Pan-Africanists. That is why the parasitic forces grew desperate and started using sectarianism, assassinations, and genocide. All that did not save those traitors. Where they still exist, it is on account of the mistakes of the international community. Trade within the Great Lakes and between the Great Lakes and the coast of the Indian Ocean was booming, although inconvenienced by the greed of the egotistical chiefs on the trade routes. There was one chief called Ruswarura in Bujinja, this is in Tanzania now, who distinguished himself in that skill of extorting what they called hongo, a form of tax from the travelers. The benevolent kings like Rumanyika or Gund of Karagwe, on the other hand, encouraged the travelers and traders and assisted them. This was long before colonialism. The feudal weakness of the chiefs and the kings of that time was the failure to see the wisdom of political integration. Although the Europeans spent about 400 years at the coast of the Indian Ocean before they had the capacity to penetrate in the interior of the continent, the myopic kings and chiefs engrossed in self-glorification. You know those kings, they would put on lions' skins and leopard skins. and they would only frighten locals, but when the Europeans came, they ran away, those chiefs. Sometimes tyranny could not see the wisdom of political integration in order to defend themselves against the strangers, the Bazungu, that were frequenting the East African coast ever since 1498, when Vasco da Gama went around the Cape of Good Hope. This is a very big lesson to us, all of us. The Europeans arrived on the East African coast in 1498. That time they could not enter the heartland of Africa. They were not strong enough. For 400 years, they stayed at the coast. Meanwhile, they were getting stronger, inventing automatic weapons, inventing the steam engine, inventing quinine to deal with malaria. Meanwhile, our chiefs here were just sitting, hearing stories from the coast, and they could not organize themselves to defend themselves. This is a very big crime by those chiefs. I hope today's people will not be like those chiefs. Eventually, that egocentrism of our chiefs and kings proved fatal. Once the Europeans had used the 4 centuries to advance themselves in technology, they called the Congress of Berlin in 1884 to partition Africa among the British, the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Dutch in South Africa. Except for Ethiopia, the whole of Africa was conquered. This was a big shame for Africa. How could we be conquered? As if we are a bunch of maggots or something like that. It was because of the internal weaknesses that we were conquered. That interaction with Europe came with the slave trade, with mass killings, imported epidemics of smallpox and other diseases, colonialism, and the looting of our natural resources. When Africa joined the worldwide anti-colonial struggle, along with India, Indonesia, Indochina, China, parts of Latin America, and some parts of the Middle East, assisted by the socialist countries, that is the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, etc. Also assisted by the wars among the imperialist countries. We were lucky that the imperialists fought among themselves. That was good for us. What they call First and Second World War. That were their own wars, fighting over us. To how to share we, the colonial possessions. We regained our freedom. This made certain circles among the imperialists very desperate. That is how they launched the criminal schemes of genocide, mass killings, assassinations of prominent political leaders, the secession schemes of Katanga, Biafra, etc., etc. Rwanda was one of the most highly centralized indigenous states. Fell a victim to these schemes. A bankrupt pseudo-ideology of dividing the people of Rwanda, who have got a common language and culture, was hatched and promoted in the form of sectarianism. While there could have been antagonistic relations between the rulers, Abayinjinya and other nobles, and I think the others are called Abatware, the Abatware. On the one hand, and the people, there could be no antagonistic relations between ordinary Batutsi and ordinary Bahutu. After the problems of Rwanda started in 1959, some circles in Europe and here also tried to present it as a social revolution. But a social revolution cannot be between the oppressed fighting the oppressed. One day we shall get time and talk about this more when we have got more time. The ordinary Hutus and the ordinary Tutsis were all oppressed by the system, in as far as the system was oppressive. Those groups, the lower groups, the Tutsis and the Hutus, had a symbiotic relationship that I have talked about above. Specialization in production and then exchange of goods. That's why we talked of the cultivators and the cattle keepers. You could not have an ordinary Mututsi extorting tribute from an ordinary Mhutu. Would an ordinary Mhutu take a maturo, that's what they call it in Kinyarwanda, to an ordinary Mututsi? You should answer that if you are old enough. The answer I know is no. The Amaturo was from the smaller people, Tutsi, Hutu, to the chiefs. It is only the rulers that will take tribute, Amaturo, from both the Tutsis and the Hutus. Using their military force, when these problems were going on, I was old enough. And I was living nearby in Ntungamo. The people from the border, from Kamwezi, Chizinga, in 1959, they came telling us about Kakomankonji. Kakomankonji was the language, the word the Banyankore gave, and I think also the Banyarwanda, gave the helicopter. That there was a plane called Kakomankonji, which was being used to follow and kill people. Now, Kayibanda did not have Kakomankonji that time. So whose Kakomankonji was this? Using their military force, the colonies supported a criminal sectarian group of Grigwa Kayibanda, whom they had trained in their seminaries in Europe, to take power and launch the first genocide of 1959 to 1963. That genocide, apart from killing hundreds of thousands, produced a Tutsi diaspora that eventually numbered 1 million. The reactionary regime told these people, this diaspora, that they could not go back to their country because it was overcrowded. When that bankrupt group was challenged by the RPF, their answer was genocide. In spite of killing 1 million people, the traitor criminal regime could not defeat the revolutionary forces. They fled to link up with their ideological colleague, Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Wazabanga Wambendu. Of Congo Kinshasa. Well, I have used Mobutu's full names because these days you are not giving him his full names because he's not here. He was called Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Wazabanga Wambendu. That is the tragic story of Rwanda, of Burundi, of Congo, of Uganda, of Sudan, and so on, where local reactionaries link up with foreign parasitic interests to cause hemorrhage of life, on an unimaginable scale in Africa and do so with impunity. I want to congratulate the people of Rwanda and the RPF for defeating these traitors and ensuring that they will never come back to kill the people of Rwanda again. We all can witness the economic growth in Rwanda and its stabilization. As a veteran patriot of this area, I would like to warn those who hobnob with the genocidaires to know that they will have to contend with the patriotic forces that defeated the traitors with their external backers when they were still much weaker. We are now much stronger in every sense of the word. We are much stronger politically, militarily, socially, and even economically. The people of Rwanda should know that they can always count on the people of Uganda. Uganda is steadfast in the support for the African emancipation. I again congratulate the RPF for defeating the traitors. I call them traitors because they created unprincipled and pseudo contradictions among the Banyarwanda. It is good that you have transcended that phase by relying on patriotism to defeat sectarianism. I wish you continued prosperity. I thank you. Thank you very much.